Hey, welcome back to Finally Talking Podcast. It's been a while since I created an episode. I think it was before Christmas. So, what happened? Anyway, honestly, I've been kind of hit with depression, anxiety, post seasonal blues of the holiday season ending, and then my classic seasonal affective disorder, which is in fact real for me. Anyway, this following is an interview that I have with an educator, my brother John. Um, he is very qualified to talk about the state of education in America, which this episode talks about, as well as his bio. He's a very intelligent guy and has some really cool things to say about things in the state of the country, state of education. And in his bio, you'll notice that he has raised his family overseas in the education system. I think he talks about that a little bit here, and he joined some kind of a program, some international teaching opportunity program, where it appears that he taught, ambassadors' kids and stuff like that, expats overseas. You'll hear it all, and it's really, really fun to hear. So I will see you on the other side. I bring to you a combination of Studs Terkel and Thomas Jefferson, an elitist, actually. Don't tell anybody. Educated on the East Coast. My brother John. And 3, 2, 1. Welcome to Finally Talking. Today I'm pleased to present with you a guest of mine who is also my brother. He's an educator, senior educator. Emphasis not on senior, though, because he looks as young as he feels, I guess. Well, anyway,
Absolutely.
I'm not really sure. Very unrehearsed here. But I wanted to talk to somebody that I knew would be qualified to answer this question about the framework about what's going on in America today. And that is this: what has happened to civics in our political discussions? We are dividing as a nation. We have about 126 members of Congress who have signed on to a lawsuit to overturn the election. I think it's probably has multiple causality to it. But one of the things I just want to ask my brother about to see if he could answer would be to say, John,
Yeah.
can you tell us a little bit about yourself today?
Peter, I was compelled to go to public schools until I was 16, much like you were. And then I chose voluntarily, while living under the roof of Don and Cheryl, to graduate from Richfield High School, much like you did.
Yes.
No, so after high school, I went to college and went to Gustavus for a couple of years, and then was priced out of that and ended up going to the University of Minnesota. Graduated in history in 1975. Made furniture, hung out, drank a few beverages, and then realized that I needed to get some work. And so I figured out that I kind of liked working with adolescents in a church camp situation, and I enjoyed history and got into education, secondary education at the University of Minnesota. Back in the day, you had to have an education degree on top of, I had to have that on top of my BA in history. So I went back for a couple of years and got a degree, and then started teaching in a small town in southern Minnesota in 1978. And left there for Osseo, northwestern suburb of Minneapolis in 1980. And basically taught there and overseas, and we can go into some of that later, but basically taught adolescents from 1978 until about 2006. And then I became kind of a quasi-administrator, instructional coach in the public schools at Osseo. And then I went overseas, taught for a couple more years, and then worked with my wife, Diane, as an administrator in a private school in South Korea.
All
So
right.
that's kind of the arc of where I was. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think it is significant though that you did go overseas because I'd like you to kind of zoom in a little bit on that. What was the program that you went on that got you to do the teaching overseas, and who exactly did you teach
Right.
overseas?
Right. Well, both Diane and I decided once that our third child, my youngest child, my son, was old enough to understand what school was after kindergarten. We thought let's get out of Minnesota to see the world. She had some experience doing that as a graduate of Mankato State and had gone down to Central America I believe she was in Honduras for a couple of years or a year or two. And I had friends who had taught overseas once I got into the Osseo school system in the 1980s. And so that kind of whetted our appetite to get our kids up and out of St. Paul, where we were living. So we pursued international placement through the University of Northern Iowa. They were the first enterprise really in the United States to kind of have a warehouse of educators and international educators come together and kind of meet up in a marketing situation over a weekend. And this international group would hire teachers who had master's degrees and so on, and had looked good on paper, I guess, didn't have any criminal record. And so after burying my criminal record, we were able to get launched, and we went to Saudi Arabia for a couple of years in that program. So that's how we started. So we taught in Saudi Arabia for 2, and then taught in Nagoya, Japan for 3, and then came back with our kids, and they finished up in Roseville schools. And then both Diane and I took off once we had retired from our public school positions, which we had retained when we were overseas the first time on this massive leave thing. We got a 5-year leave from our districts. Once we finished our obligations there in our late 50s, I went to Central America. I went down to actually South America, Venezuela for a couple of years to teach. And Diane was going to join me. She's a Spanish speaker, and we thought that would be great. The two of us would find a nice little place in Ecuador and live there happily ever after and teach and retire there. But she sent me an email saying that she was being interviewed for a principal position in South Korea. And so one thing led to another. I finished up my contract in Venezuela and ended up in South Korea with her. But that's just a biography of it. Those schools were, as you asked, who do they serve? Well, generally they're expat schools. So people from the United States who have businesses, like in Saudi Arabia, you can imagine Texans, people that are interested in oil,
Right.
are all over. Actually, the Texans are all over the world. They've got quite a big reach, be it the military or be it oil. I've bumped into them all over the world. So expats for the most part, and also the diplomatic corps in all of these places. The diplomats, the consulates that were located, the American consulates that were located around there. We had those kids as well, especially in Venezuela. We were the primary school. We were the big kahuna in Caracas for the diplomatic corps. And so those kids would show up at schools. But these are private schools, really unlike anything in the public schools that we had experienced. And but I'm kind of a public school guy when it all gets down to it. Yeah.
You know, in those locations, I think of Saudi Arabia and Venezuela. I would imagine, given the nature of the U.S. being a target for terror attacks and so on, and during this time frame when you were doing this, were the physical buildings where you taught this school off campus, or were they within the walls of embassy with, being guarded and all that?
Yeah, well, the interesting thing about Saudi Arabia, maybe I told you this before. I don't know if people know this, but you and I are brothers, right?
Yes, we are brothers.
Yeah,
Now, I have not taken my 23andMe test and compared it against my brothers. I think I'm Norwegian, but I could have some Italian in me. But anyway, go ahead. I might have some Corsican, because Dad used to talk a lot about Corsica. I know. John.
Yeah, exactly. We'll get into that in the next podcast. But well, Saudi Arabia is really interesting because we, I don't know if you have time for all of this. You can edit out whatever you want.
Of course, I'm very diligent about my editing.
Yeah, well, you might want to cut this out. It's interesting to me, but as my family will tell me, sometimes things don't interest anybody else but me.
Well,
but
that's why we're both sitting here, John. Nobody wants to listen to us anymore.
Exactly. And I'll contact you about my podcast shortly. We can flip the arrows a little bit.
That's right.
Yeah.
We'll talk about accounting. It's a subject near and dear to everyone's hearts.
How did you get into it? Yeah. And where did you get all those brown shoes? But anyways, getting back. Well, Saudi, we went down to Iowa thinking that we're going to work in China. This is like really on the edge. This is 98,
Right,
99, really on the edge of the internet and putting the resumes up on the
right,
online and stuff. It hadn't quite happened yet.
right,
But we had gotten to their website and it looked like they were going to tap us for China. So that's what we thought we were going to do with the kids. And we had our house up for sale, and we went handed off the kids to some friends for the weekend. And it's like a speed dating thing, and went down there and went to these what do they call, Pinaflex folders with my name on it,
yeah,
and looked for my name, and I got a little invitation. We'd get these little handheld invitations to show up and speak with a headhunter for the school, or the head of HR for the school, who would fly in. And as we found out, being on the other side of this in Korea, this is like a great thing to come to the United States, take a week off, do it on the company dime. I mean, this is a
right,
great little gig for these educators.
sure.
So anyway, well, we showed up, and it turned out that Saudi Arabia was after us, and this is shortly after Bin Laden had executed or blown up some building not far from where we ended up working.
Right out in
I think
Riyadh
in
over
90,
there. 96,
97.
7. Yeah,
Yeah,
right, right.
yeah.
That yes,
And
I
the
remember
whole
that.
and the whole body bag. We want to see Americans in body bags, and so we
That
thought, well,
whole
this
thing.
looks like an opportunity. Yeah, the kids are
Right.
small; they could get two
Let,
kids in a bag, or
let's
whatever.
go there.
Yeah. So we sat down in this interview, and I swear to God, Pete, it was really weird. Most of the interviews really liked Diana and myself. She was a nationally board certified teacher, and she's got all kinds of credentials. And she also had a master's from St. Thomas. I had a master's from Harvard. We had both been leaders in our schools. So on paper, we really look good to these people, because this international market, there's a lot of gypsies out there kind of,
Right.
looking for work. And sometimes people are flying under the radar a little bit, personnel wise, and just looking to get out of the country, if you know what I mean.
Right.
So we were kind of a hot commodity. Minnesota, we had that non-accent. We were well
Yeah.
educated, had these kids in tow. And the first thing that the Saudi guy said to us in the room, and I just remember this as plain as day, he looks at us and he goes, "Well, let's talk about security." And I just went, "Okay, let's talk about security." And he proceeded to tell us, of course, things that wouldn't have happened if there had been a big hassle. But the State Department was going to be there for us, and we'd be evacuated, no problem. And this is what your contract will look like if you're evacuated. But don't worry about it. We don't think that there's never been an issue. We've had issues in Saudi prior to this, maybe you're aware of, blah, blah, blah. And then he dangled the salary in front of us, and it was really a good salary. I mean, it's
Right.
something we had never seen as public school teachers. And there's no taxes
Right.
in overseas work up to a certain threshold.
Mhm.
And so we jumped on that, but it was a security issue. We ended up staying there for 2 years just prior to 9/11. I mean, we got out in the
Right.
summer of 2001, and 9/11, of course, occurred that September.
Right.
But
And
yeah,
were you able to travel freely throughout the area, or did you have to kind of stay within certain parameters in Saudi?
I could travel, but as people know that are maybe watching this, women couldn't travel freely. Even spouses couldn't travel freely without a signature of
Right.
the male. So if, for instance, we had a situation come up where Anna was going to be in the national swim tournament at Jeddah, which is on the other side of the country near the Red Sea. And I had to sign a permission slip. It's the last one I've ever signed for Diane.
Right.
Permission slip for Diane to travel across Saudi
Mm.
with my daughter.
She appreciated it,
Um,
I'm sure.
she sure did. But um, we could travel freely. As a matter of fact, that first year, we decided to go for it. We had a new car. We had a new 4x4 Toyota thing, appliance white. Everything was appliance white, it seemed. Um, and we took off on a road trip, went to Oman. So we cut across the Gulf and
Mm.
went through UAE and got to Oman and went through parts of Oman down south towards Yemen, and then drove out of there. And we had quite an adventure. It was actually during Ramadan, and so we'd get these Ramadan hotel rates when we were traveling from the local people who were happy to see us, because most people aren't in hotels during Ramadan in that region of the world. They're celebrating with their families every night,
And not to
fasting and
be
so on.
not to be an ugly American, but did they feed
Mm,
you during
absolutely.
Ramadan at these hotels? Did you get a breakfast?
Absolutely. You could always, yeah, expats were always, our
You
money
could.
was good. Our money was
Okay,
good. Yeah. I
that's
mean, it was limited. I can't remember specifically, I'm sure things were shut down.
sure.
I'm sure it wasn't as open as everything else, but no, we ate and were able to travel freely. And really on the eastern side of the province, and even through the Persian Gulf in our travels, um, it's pretty westernized just because of all the oil. And Oman is
Right.
really international because of the coast,
Hmm.
much more so than Saudi. But anyway, yeah,
Yeah. Well, that's certainly good experience. And then I just want to move quickly over to Venezuela now. That was a few
yeah,
years ago, and we all know how Venezuela has this reputation now for,
yeah,
well, for what it is. Can
yeah.
you tell us if there's any kind of a difference there between Venezuela and Saudi, or if you felt more repressed there as an American, or how were things in that culture for you?
The banditry was worse. I mean, the criminal
Okay.
pieces, the proximity of the barrios to the upper middle class area where I was living made it more dangerous, just because people were looking to find out what the wealthy were wearing and what the wealthy were
Right.
carrying,
Right.
and so it was dangerous that way, and there was crime, serious crime, kidnappings. And kidnappings as you know, in Central and South America is different than kidnappings here, where there's a shallow grave and there's a rape and there's a
Right.
ugliness and all
Right.
that stuff. In South America, it was always like an ATM. It's like you're an ATM machine.
Right.
They would take your cell phone, they would extort money out of your contacts, and then they drop you off somewhere.
Yeah, you
But
hear
they
that a
were,
lot about the
yeah,
businessmen who travel they have a
yeah.
security team because of that. Yeah.
Yeah, so we had security around us all the time, but the common denominator between the two countries obviously is the oil. They're
Yeah.
kind of one horse towns, so to speak, and it just didn't do either one of them any good, and it may not do Saudi any good in the long run. I mean, it was comical how Saudi was such a closed-in country. You couldn't even visit unless you were a relative of somebody that was working there, and everybody that was working there had to be sponsored by a particular business in order for us to get a visa.
Mm-hmm.
Even our school system took our passports, which is kind of alarming
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
when we got into the country. But because the focus on oil, both of these countries had let everything else go to hell. They just went with the oil.
Yeah.
And Venezuela really paid the price for that. As a matter of fact, I believe Venezuela, the story on the street when I left there in 2012 was that they were actually importing gasoline. They, they they were actually, I think Chevron was actually taking the crude
Mm-hmm.
into U.S. refineries and then selling the gasoline back to the Venezuelans. And Chavez had made this sweet deal with the locals in order to grease the wheels for himself,
Sure.
where he gave gas away. So you could take your largest SUV today, and for like $1, you could fill it up
Yeah,
in Venezuela.
I was familiar with that kind of a thing going on down there. Did you ever feel like this may seem a little, well, I mean, for people that don't travel like that outside the country, especially to those kind of countries, did you
Mm.
ever feel like you were being looked at as a CIA operative? Or I know it seems like kind of an ignorant question,
Hmm.
but I mean,
Hmm.
did you ever get the vibe that people may have thought, oh, you're not just some teacher, that's your cover? Or I mean, were you treated well generally, or did you have some people that kind of gave you second looks, on the streets or what have you?
In If you go to Saudi Arabia,
Right.
it was a guessing game. Like who's the CIA agent on campus? Which one of us is with the CIA? I mean, there was definitely some presence, either affiliated with the school system itself,
Mm-hmm.
or even the classroom teachers. So there were some guesses out there, as to
You
who it would be. But
oh,
no, we were not. We were just plebes. We were just
right,
the educators. So,
right,
but we were definitely, targets in a way, in both countries. And in Saudi, the State Department would tell us to change our routes to school every now and then. We get these alerts that something would go on in another part of the country or another part of the Persian Gulf, and we'd get some notices from the State Department. Again, we were on consulate grounds as well in Saudi,
right.
so we didn't know if we were shielding, the State Department, or if the State Department was supporting us. We really didn't know
Right.
which way those arrows were going. So,
Yeah,
but
that's got to be pretty
yeah,
confusing in that situation. You have colleagues that you're having coffee with them, and then you're wondering, I wonder if you're involved in any kind of assassination plot. And then you feel absurd for thinking that. But then on the other hand, you think about where you are. It would be like a
yeah,
complete maze wrapped in an enigma, wrapped in a riddle or what have you, like a
yeah,
Russian
yeah,
doll or
yeah,
what have you.
yeah. No, it was, not maybe to that point, but it was a little crazy being overseas, for that reason, because we definitely had you know, I spoke at a party to some State Department folks, and this was in 2010. They had kicked out, I think that Chavez had kicked out the American diplomat, and they just had some State Department workers there, and they would tell stories about this, that, and the other thing. And in Saudi, again, like I said, we wouldn't know where the State Department was, but we counted on them because of the evacuation threat. And there were threats being made on expats, but it was hard to distinguish whether it was because they didn't like us in their country, or if it was a part of um, the alcohol issue in Saudi Arabia. It's a dry
Oh,
state, and there's a lot of
oh,
black
right,
market stuff going on. It's like the Untouchables.
right.
Going on in Saudi with the Brits and the Americans vying for the illegal alcohol market. At least some of that was going on. And some of the explosions and some of the quote unquote terrorist bombings that were occurring in Saudi when we were there in the city where we were teaching, had nothing to do with ugly Americans as much as it had to do with alcohol and just
Wow.
market things. Yeah.
Well, that's starting to kind of get into the main point of why I wanted to talk to you today. I think we take advantage of, or we take for granted, the fact that we live in a society where, as we go about our day, we don't really hear explosions, going on in
Right.
this city. They're
Right.
not part of the normalcy of America at
Right.
this point.
Right.
We kind of figure we can travel, pretty freely. I can go up into areas that I know are very more right wing or what have you,
Right.
as they would say, red state or red country, but feel generally like I can go into a cafeteria, get something to eat, and I'm going to get back in the car and everything's going to be okay. However, I do notice, and I think most people do, that there is a deterioration of that kind of a political discourse in America. I don't think we're there yet, where I don't feel safe yet. However, I do think that there is kind of a movement that's de-threading the fabric of our society. And I'm wondering, while there are multiple causes of that, I'm sure, to be sure, there's everybody's branding themselves as the next Trump or what have you. But how about this? What role do you think the education system can play as we move forward in a post-Trump era? Not that Trumpism itself is dead, or I wouldn't even want to call it
Right.
Trumpism, other than
Right.
I would call it anti-democratic forces are in play here
Right.
beyond Trump. The genie's
Right.
out. Because some people have said, well, if only we could bring back the broadcasting, that fairness doctrine. that may be impossible to do in a society that gets their news all over the place rather than just
Right.
Walter Cronkite. But
Right.
as long as we still have a sort of unified school system, what do you think the educational system can play in saying, okay, this generation, say my age or older, we're
Right.
gone, we're
Right.
done. Okay,
Right.
so let's see if we can bring something back. What would you say the
Well,
role it would be?
yeah, if I could just go back a little bit. I mean, this
Yeah,
is like in my wheelhouse because I
you
thought
bet.
about this a lot. In the 1980s, when I started teaching public school, social studies is what I taught. And these would be history courses. This would be political science, economics, some civics, to freshmen later on in my career. But for the most part, I always thought of public education as being this last chance for America, all America, to really come together in one building and kind of rub shoulders with each other a little bit and get to know each other a little bit, black, white, red, gay, straight,
Right.
whatever, and kind of the big tent. And it was interesting, Peter, because it was about maybe the late 60s or late 70s or something. Milton Friedman came out with this idea. He was proposing this at University of Chicago economist was proposing this school choice thing.
Oh yes,
And this
Milton Friedman.
and the whole
Oh,
school choice thing, right, was all about, as maybe your listeners know, as you know, was all about taking the money from that was being paid for by taxpayers, taking that and turning that into a voucher. And so telling the school that you could take a voucher, take X that is now going to the public school in order to create competition because the schools are so rotten. We got to create competition.
right.
He saw it as a business, so he just improves the business by competing with it. The problem with that is that you end up segregating, you end up draining tax dollars from the public schools. You end up,
Right.
and by segregating, I'm talking about, what schools would do is just take X plus, right? And if you didn't
Right.
have X plus, your kids were still stuck at the non-performing school or whatever, according
Right.
to if you want to run his argument out. So given that, and given the Reagan administration in the 1980s with their Nation at Risk report by Bill Bennett, came up with this report saying that America education was bullshit, which paralleled, in your life and my life, our dad's comment about the American auto industry going to hell in a handbasket, no longer buying American cars because they were getting
Right.
crushed by, the Japanese for the most part
Hmm.
at that time. But all of that spooked America, and "Let's make America great again" was Reagan's mantra in 1980.
Yes.
And so Trump couldn't say all those words, so they had to shorten it up for him.
Right.
Uh, but anyways, Bill Bennett came out and just attacked schools, and along with Milton Friedman. I mean, getting back to Friedman and getting back to Bennett, competition. Let's make them better, and this whole kind of notion that you got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and this kind of trickle down economy,
Right.
the end of labor unions and all that shit. Schools just kind of were under assault because we're also public schools at that point. The baby boomers were having kids, and schools were getting because society in general wasn't paying taxes to accommodate all the social needs going on within our
Right.
society. Schools were the gateway for they're all the elementary school teachers are the ones that kind of determine, who needs support, who doesn't need support, who gets a social worker, who doesn't get a social worker.
Right.
And all of that was falling on the schools. And then when these unfunded mandates would come through, like, you got to get your test scores up, you got to do this, you got to do that. And there was no money to
Right.
do it. And so as a result, everybody's dancing as fast as they can. But does that lead to, 120 reps saying they're going to support
Sedition.
sedition? I only to the point of where the battle forever was trying to get enough money to do the kind of job that you wanted to do as a teacher. My domain was within the social studies, and my notion there was to create critical thinkers as best I could, to increase the amount of mandatory years needed to graduate in social studies. We only had a 2-year graduation requirement in Osseo when I started, and I don't know if they added another trimester to that or not. But the problem was, in that area of social studies, social sciences, it was almost like, you got to be kidding. We're not worried about that. We're worried about getting more engineers out there so they can develop a car that can compete with the Corolla, for Christ's sake.
Right.
You know? So even in graduate school in the 1980s, you know, I remember going in Boston, this poor little school near Harvard, had every education student in the world come through it, I'm sure. And there was a little fatigue, I'm sure, by the principal. But I walked into that school and asked him about social studies program in the elementary level. And he said, you know, we don't have time for that. You know, we're working on math and science. You know,
Right.
we just have no time for that. And I do think that resources have been sucked off over the last 20 years from the arts, from literature, from the humanities, and well, not all the humanities, because science is a part of that if you want. But you know, the siphoning off of resources into other areas has led to you know, less touch with social studies, less touch with, and I really am kind of a, you know, that's the place where the big questions should be asked. Like, what is the Constitution? What does it really mean? Does it mean that you don't have to wear a mask if your neighbor's going to die because you know
Right.
you're sick? You know, I mean, what does it really mean? I mean, you just see the ignorance all the time on TV.
Well,
So
there has been a united front. I do admire their discipline in their messaging and their use of the vernacular changes via people like a Frank Luntz, who does enough focus groups to change the way they word things that almost sound kind of reasonable if you don't have critical thinking, right? So, you know, I think there is a thread between what we're talking about and sedition, because now, okay, it kind of goes to the whole, you can win an election by wearing a flag and a cross, okay? And that's all you got to do. You don't even have to believe it anymore, but there's enough people out there that don't understand really enough about what the freedoms are and really what the Constitution is, which seems to be, as we find out, while there's some ambiguous writing, it's really a thread of gentlemen's agreements, frankly, that say reasonable people agree to function as a society and compromise and you know, try to make it move ahead, whereas now it's being used, like you say, I mean, it's being weaponized. It's, you know, Constitution says this, or even people on our side, John, some of the people that want to burn the whole house down, they forget, you know, you want to burn that house down. Do you realize that between burning house down and establishing left-wing utopia, there's a lot of dead bodies there?
Right. Absolutely. Well, I think that, yeah, to that point, you know, let's talk about the 5 policies that Trump talked about during his campaign and the 5 policies that Biden talked about during his campaign. No, there was none of that. Trump was out there name calling, and Biden was out there talking about, isn't it going to be nice to have me in there instead? You know, and there's no policies being discussed. There are no unintended consequences of public policies being discussed at all. And I think that, you know, if you look at, you know, just the federal budget, you know, if you look at the militarization of the federal budget, if you look at the, you know, if you add in the Veterans Affairs, it's about $800 billion is being spent by this country for something that we just discovered this weekend. With 5 great computers, I think you can take the whole motherfucker down. You know,
that's right.
You know,
yeah, that's right.
5 great computers and a couple eggheads, women and men, sitting in a bunker, sitting where I'm sitting, for all I care, could take the whole motherfucker down. Meanwhile, education gets about 1/12 of that. Federal money towards education gets 1/12, and the excuse is always, well, education's local. Well, you know what? You can do a hell of a lot with public, you know, getting back to public education and getting back to introducing kids to the Constitution, into public policy discussions, into history, into the fact that history doesn't have one story, and that's okay. But
Right.
let's take a look at the various stories and let's vet them against a certain criteria, the critical thinking idea, right?
Right.
Let's vet them against these criterias, and you can decide that these are the criterias that you don't want to use, but you're going to be responsible for saying that, not just throwing out some stupid slogan out there.
Yeah.
But anyway, take some of that defense. I mean, really, Peter, $800 billion compared to 74 billion.
Right.
Let's take that money. And today, for instance, during the pandemic, it's just been exposed. I mean, Diana's out there right now in Espanola. This is Breaking Bad America, right out where she's working right now.
Yeah.
And
Right.
she's got family members who come. People are worried about, there's issues with Zoom because mom's in her panties and bra and should be on the camera. Should be walking through. Well, she's got issues where people, you know, might be high, possibly
Right.
coming into the camera, and that's universal. It's not just her, but there's
Right.
all kinds of issues out there with connectivity, issues with who's got a laptop, who doesn't,
Right.
issues about teachers. Um, you know, all that can be taken care of with some money. For instance, one of my things that I always thought, if I was the education czar or whatever, if I was the Bill
Yes.
Bennett of the Biden administration,
Right.
I would somehow get into the collective bargaining agreement, but I would pay extra money, significantly extra money to educators, good educators. They'd have to kind of be vetted somehow.
Hmm.
Extra money to educators to work in different areas of the country.
Right.
Um, it might be that, was it the Clinton plan that threw kids into
Like that Peace Corps type of thing for
yeah,
America.
it wasn't called peace. Yeah,
No, it
whatever
was,
that
but it
was,
was
AmeriCorps,
AmeriCorps.
whatever.
There it is. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I would do that, but put it on steroids if I had money from
Right.
the Defense Department. Put it on steroids and pay people to get into these different areas, and see if they could somehow work within the district or within the states that need it. But again, the last time that Republican and Democratic folks are all going to come together in the same place is going to be that band concert at that public high school,
Right.
or maybe that football field, But
Yeah.
then again, I just think it's public schools are where it's at, and without
Yeah.
supporting them, we're cutting our own throats. It's a place that it's not an immediate fix. It's not a quick fix. It's not like
No.
everybody's going to kumbaya and we're all going to start talking with each other. But it really makes a difference if you can have really strong, sensitive, and wonderful educators working with all kinds of Americans in the same building, in the same classroom.
Well, I just have this. Yeah, it's generational. I mean, you have to bring the new kids in and basically just teach them how to be a good citizen. And look, I know in the late 70s when I watched those black and white films or some kid was saluting the flag, I was just like, oh, whatever, man. But I took it for granted because we were under the umbrella of leadership who had fought fascism literally. So,
Right.
I could laugh at that because I knew that the people in Washington, whether you hated them or not, they all kind of thought, yeah, we've seen this stuff firsthand when a country falls apart. But
Mm-hmm.
now there's a whole generation gone. And so there's
Mm-hmm.
no firsthand knowledge about
Right.
how awful this can really get. Now, you
Right.
can have your opportunists like your Alex Jones out there, screaming about we won't be governed by these socialists and all that. But, they don't really they don't really understand what really does happen when a society crumbles. And I've been accused of being an alarmist, by saying, well, I just don't want to see what would happen to a country that's functionally literate and culturally flourishing deteriorate and descend. And people
Right.
would say, well, it can't happen here, right? There it is, that whole thing. But it can on
Oh
a
yeah.
dime, on
Oh
a
yeah.
dime.
I just heard yesterday shoplifting's up.
Right.
I
Yeah.
mean, you can tear at the fabric in a lot of different ways. Shoplifting
Yes.
is not going to be a revolution. but
No.
there are indicators out there. Economically, we know that civil. We know that what went on this summer in Minneapolis, in part, was due to the fact that um, um, people were kind of pent up and hadn't been out. There was that, but we also know that it was economic driven. And this redlining city that we grew up in, Peter, had just
Yep.
eliminated opportunities for generations. Now, there's been to me, some naive kind of generalizations about how evil all the people are that have created the situation in the police department and so on.
Right.
That hasn't done us any good. But I don't. I just want to mention that. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just ranting.
It's okay. No, they have
Yeah.
been militarized. I get it. It's not. It's the. I've got a book called "Friendly Workers Visit Larry" from my childhood. It was one of those golden key books, and it
Oh
has
man,
the premise of that book in
I passed it down
1965.
to you. Yeah.
Yeah,
No,
yeah. It's
no, I
it's
did.
it's where Larry is left alone by his mom in the house,
All right.
and
All
while
right.
while she's gone, all these guys of different occupations come and visit him. Now today, of course, that would lend itself to a lot of law enforcement issues. But one of the visitors of Larry, I believe, is a cop who comes
Yeah,
in,
yeah,
just randomly knocks on his door and says, "Hi, is your mother home?" "No, she's not." "Oh, great. Can I come in?"
yeah,
But what I mean,
yeah.
what I'm trying to get to is that friendly, and I understand society, they're
Me too.
reacting to society, but they're
Oh,
no
me too.
longer
Absolutely.
a friend of the neighborhood. And and
Right.
and I know I
Right.
speak from a position of being a white guy talking about it like
Right.
that,
Absolutely. Me too.
but but still they are armed to the teeth, and their first go-to is to it's no longer about relationships or anything like that. It feels like that's just deteriorated. Now, circling back to the education system,
Well, if I could just
civics.
say one thing, though,
Yeah,
I
go
just
ahead.
wanted to cite one
Yeah.
thing. In Brooklyn Park, where I taught for years in the '90s, um, uh, kids of color would talk about their Friday nights, and it was just totally different than the kids, the white kids.
Right.
Kids of color are getting pulled over all over the place.
Right.
Um, they couldn't get out of the house, or they didn't have cars because they weren't being hired. I mean, there's
Yeah.
some,
There's
there's
that.
huge issues. There's huge issues.
Public
There's
transportation. Yeah.
there's huge. It's not just bad apples, but there's systemic racism that has occurred, and the country definitely needs to address it. Minneapolis definitely needs to address it.
Now, I know that in my 11-year-old and in my 18-year-old, he's a senior this year, they are teaching diversity, and it's not just that blanket, that whole what other people would call politically correct stuff, but they're actually at a core level, I notice my kids' generations friends are people that are first generation Americans from different countries around the world, something I never
Mhm.
experienced in Richfield. And it's
Right.
very
Right.
normal to them. But I also know that when I post a picture of one of my kids' birthday parties and there's a Somalian kid or a kid from Ecuador or what have you, some of my Richfield Facebook graduates are just kind of like, oh yeah, them people. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I'm hoping that you can go to the education system very early on in kindergarten, preschool, and get these kids used to it.
Yeah.
I don't know though how you can go out into those small towns unless you have a program like what you said. So if going back to if you were the czar, you would say just like they've done with doctors, you'd send teachers into small towns and
Yeah,
and
I mean,
and
wherever they're needed, whatever they're needed to do, and you know what, those teachers, those young educated people,
yeah.
hopefully very diverse in their own right, right? It
Mhm.
doesn't take much to, and I don't know what the small towns in Minnesota are like anymore. I don't think there's. I mean, it's incredible how small townish they were, you know, 30 years ago.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I just find it hard to believe that they can still have these provincial beliefs. Although in Minnesota, didn't Minnesota, isn't there a huge dispute going on right now with a Nazi church that was sanctioned by some small community, or I don't know. I don't know
Yeah,
what's
yeah,
I don't know
it's
what's going
out
on.
there. There's I think like you see a lot in the north, not like, okay, so in the Iron Range, you have the environmentalists versus the people that want to build resorts and lodges to make money off of it.
Right,
But then in the northwestern side of the state, you do have those I will not be governed, or when I woke up it was a free country,
right,
that kind of
right,
crowd.
right.
And yeah, there's a lot of that, and it's very insidious as you see the suburbs growing around Minneapolis that are getting like that, like your first ring suburbs, well, maybe not first ring but second ring suburbs south of Minneapolis and south of St. Paul, the Inver Grove Heights and so on. You're seeing a group of people that are, they're more insidious because they act like they believe in all the right things, but that under their breath are like, not these types of people, not in my backyard.
Another thing that would diversify some of these neighborhoods, some of these places, would be to let's look at healthcare. Let's make sure that these hospitals are staffed. And again, let's pay X plus to get people into these hospitals. Well, guess who the doctors and the nurses are today in the urban areas? They're made up of a whole slew of humanity.
Right,
It's not all white guys,
right,
from Minnetonka, uh,
right,
you know,
right.
doing their weekend at Lord Fletcher's, with their boats. It's a lot different now, and I think that would also bring diversity into these communities. It's kind of rubbing shoulders. You got to rub shoulders with people in order not to fear them, and you've got to be. There also needs to be some dialogue too, and I don't know how you get to that dialogue, how a community would get to that unless they have a local newspaper, which they don't anymore, of course. But
No, yeah,
you
that's
know,
a
you
big
need to
deal.
you need to get to a local dialogue, and I don't know if that's going to come out of the Lutheran churches in rural Minnesota,
Right.
or what. But you just need people that have gone away, gotten educated, seen the world. Somehow, they have to be welcomed back to have a discussion with those who didn't leave without talking down to them,
Yes.
saying, "Hey, what's going on? It looks like the factories." They're not running as many overtime shifts, but there's more people working. And then you'll hear well, that's because all these people moved. Well, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
talk about those people, what those people, whoever they
Yeah.
are.
Right. No, that's
So
true. Now, do you think education can be the tip of a spear in that if you can create a generation of people that grew up in, and let's try to flesh out your vision. Okay. So you're going to have money thrown at you. We're just going to pretend that you're going to get your wish list. Okay. You're going to
okay.
get that money thrown your way. One of the things that you just said was you're going to be putting teachers out into small communities in rural America. What other things that you can think of from your years of experience and your travels, frankly, that you've seen that do work if you want to go down that best practices model that you could apply in a country like America where we're bumping up against right wing theocrats? you know
Yeah, well, I don't know exactly what I would do, but I would try to make money. On a federal level, I think what you have to do is have bags of money and allow the states to make decisions about how to get that out to the school districts. You're not going to make it a federal um, school system,
right,
but you can. I think you can put money out there with minimal strings attached to it. And again,
right,
I'm talking about having those resources, having that money out there, and telling like Minnesota, hey, given the number of kids that you have in that are public school age, here's the money. And what I would do is, screw the private schools. They can, do whatever
yeah,
you need to do with Lord Fletcher's on a
yeah,
fundraiser.
yeah, the
We're
hell with
getting
you.
back to that,
Right,
but take it to the public schools and say, here's some cash. You can apply for it this way, like grant writing or whatever, through the Minnesota Department of Education, and we'll distribute these federal funds out to you. And it would do everything like when I talked about um, public schools being the gateway for all these social services. It'd be everything from social services. I mean, Peter, I was in Park Center High School, 1,600 students, it was bigger than most of these small towns we're talking about.
Right.
And we
Right.
had one or two social workers
Right.
for that whole group.
Mhm.
It was insane. It was insane. The pathology in that community was just insane. So, anyways, if you want us to take care of, want us to do the kinds of things, plus teach your kids, then here's some grant money to do this kind of stuff. Now, yeah, you're gonna have to have people looking over, bureaucrats looking over, making sure that the money is spent appropriately. Well, that's what bureaucrats are for. They can do that. You're an accountant. You can do that until all day long. You can
Yeah.
just look at the numbers. Let's see the numbers. Let's see the numbers, and occasionally arrest somebody and throw them into Stillwater. But just make that happen. That's what I would do. I would just have on the federal level bigger bags of money. I would
Right.
say 10 times bigger to the states, given the goddamn defense budget, and just and the idea that 5 laptops could take down America today, and
Correct.
then just hand that money to different states in education and see what happens.
I
It
wonder.
is I don't know. It is education. I
It
just think
does
it is.
appear to me that's a root cause right there, because I just think if we don't know how to be citizens, if we don't know how to not talk to, if we don't know how to talk to each other,
Right.
one issue that comes to mind first as one pushback against your idea is that, and it's only because I see this everywhere, and I don't know if it's a
Mhm.
red herring or not, but you
Yeah.
come up against that states' rights crowd, right?
Right. Right.
And you have this bag of money, and we've seen it with the healthcare, right? The incentive to say, here's this bag of money, now you got a Republican governor or whoever saying, I don't want your stupid cash.
Right.
Now what?
Right.
So now
Right.
what?
Well, see. I would just make the argument that you have to be more effective in instruction. You
Right.
have to create citizens who understand what the why I don't want that money is all about. What are they talking about? Are they just playing politics with it? Are they
Right.
what are they saying? Are they saying that this there's always strings attached and they're so insidious that we don't want it? Well, show me your information. Let
Right.
me make, as a citizen, let me judge whether my small town, because I came down from Minneapolis. I'm highly educated. I'm a surgeon in this small town in Alabama, and I know that we could use the money in our school system. So make the
Right.
argument, but
Yeah, you have to
I'm
get that
educated.
from, no, but from the bottom up, that's how you do it. You have to, and frankly, the other side has done that quite successfully. They do that grassroots thing where they drive it from the bottom up. They have the federal thing, and it's almost like there's a whispering campaign going all through America at the bottom levels of those folks, where they kind of drive the demand from the bottom, where the local guy says, yeah,
I think we just need to rebrand. Getting into the
rebrand. There
vernacular of
you
the
go.
day, we need to rebrand things a little bit.
Yeah.
Instead of wrong being right, let's make right being right.
Right.
Instead of just need to rebrand it, because I don't think that everybody in the world is a part of these conspiracy theories. I don't think every person that doesn't go to college is a conspiracist or a
Right.
racist or even a
Right.
Trumper. They're not.
They're not.
But the brand is, there's the brand. He's saying it's true. Okay, yeah, I don't have time to really think about it. Okay. And what's the other side saying? They're saying he's an asshole. Well, I don't like them calling him names, so
Right.
I'll stay with him. You
Right.
know, it's
Yeah. Yeah.
anyway.
And who has to take the first step? It always feels like on our side, we are
Yeah.
always the ones who are
Oh yeah.
taking the first step, or we're always the ones that are starting from a position, even when we have the power to
Right.
say, will you please help us work on this? And they're just so intransient. Is
Right.
that the word, intransit? No, intransit. What is the word, John? Intransit something.
Stubborn. Yeah.
Stubborn. Yeah, there
Stubborn.
you go.
Yeah. No.
Simplification. But uh, yeah, I don't think even the 75 million people who voted for Trump are all seditionists, right? I mean,
Right.
there's generational republicanism. There's just I don't care to think about it too much. Socialism seems kind of bad, even though I do like my Social Security and I do like
I
the
mean,
highways.
Peter, as a social studies teacher today, I'd tell my kid, blah, 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 blah. We'd run 5 lessons on what this is all about, and I want the Republican kids to go home to their parents, and if they were asked if they saw their parents, which is who knows,
Right, right.
they might ask the question like, "Well, Dad, how do you know that? How do you know?"
That's
Because Lund said in social studies said that this is the way we can understand what the truth is. And he said that the liberals make mistakes too, but your side also makes mistakes, and that just needs to go on and on and on and on and
yeah,
on.
yeah.
So
There you go, to own that. Well, listen, I
yeah,
think that's a good place to stop for today. But this has been really fun, John. Better than I expected out of us talking today. Honestly, I think one of the things I'm getting out of this is that we need, and this is so obvious, we need more money toward education. We need better critical thinking, and I think we need to find a way. And the most powerful thing you said was a minute ago. You said when a kid can go home and says, yeah, Lund, he just said that liberals make mistakes, but your side makes mistakes too. And if I mean, I'm just not going to lie and say that you won't have 20 parents petitioning for your
yeah,
removal from the school
yeah,
system. But I
yeah,
mean, but forgetting all that, if you get enough of that, if you get to that critical mass of kids, critical thinking kids who have
yeah,
gone through
yeah,
this from K through
yeah,
12 at age
yeah.
15, 16, while we still fear our parents, we're starting to
Right,
rebel against them. And to be able to say, Dad, I've heard this. I get it. You don't like Nixon,
right,
but you know what? Did he not start the EPA? I mean, I don't,
right,
it's
right, right,
bullshit,
right, right,
but
right,
you get
right.
what I'm saying.
Absolutely,
You need
absolutely, yeah.
that. And that John is why I would probably nominate you the education czar for America. So I
Well,
don't know where the ballots are, but
I don't
you have
know
a
either.
contact. Wow. Right? Hey, so one of the big points that came out of this discussion with my brother about education and the public sphere in general is this: public schools are the last bastion, the final place where Republicans, Democrats, Independents, or whatever, liberals, conservatives, can all be together at the same time. Like at a game for their kids, or at a concert, or a play, and not hate on each other. So, how do we translate that into post education? But see, that's the important part. As American citizens, as if you want to talk about civics, we have to start early, and we can't let that go. We cannot not have that, because that is the instruction manual for us going forward in our lives as Americans. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. I sure did. That was a lot of fun. See you on the other side. Bye. I said bye.